the other home care agencies are great, but they are still competition at the end of the day. So you need to build referral sources in other places. My number one referral source is a home health agency. You know, they're coming in to do PT and OT a couple times a week for an hour or so. Typically, people who need that level of care also need some additional resources, and that's where home care can come in.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight, brought to you by Zengage, the leading caregiver engagement platform. I'm joined today by Zach Vaughn, Executive Director and owner of Home Helpers of Woodbridge, Virginia. Zach, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Really appreciate you having me on. I'm really excited to get the chance to come on here and speak with your audience.
Yeah. Well, for people who are not familiar with you, how would you introduce yourself?
I'm Zach Vaughn, the Executive Director of Home Helpers Home Care of Woodbridge, Virginia. We're a family-owned, veteran-owned agency located in Woodbridge, and we've been operating for going on 5 years now. And, you know, that family-owned piece is really big to us. I run the business with my mom, and we have a lot of fun doing it. You know, we kind of got into this business after taking care of a family member of our own, our aunt. And I just knew with my dad being a retired corpsman and a medic in the Navy, and my mom being a retired Marine, that we could do a better job as a family than what we were seeing in our community. And proud to say that so far we really have.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And talk a little bit about the kind of like decision-making process that went into starting a business together, and how have you liked, you know, kind of all working together?
Yeah, so that decision-making process, it really kicked off with my parents, you know, recognizing the need. We had a neighbor across the street from us who was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, and we grew up just kind of, you know, shoveling his driveway and helping him out with things. And once it was about time for him to get a caregiver, we just started hearing the horror stories about how bad those things were. And I was in education. My mom was in commercial real estate, and, you know, COVID had hit and things were looking a little funky. And like I said, I knew with my parents' background and my own ability that we could do a great job. And so far we really have. You know, working with my mom, it's been an amazing thing. You know, she recognizes my strengths and I recognize her strengths. And so really in the beginning, it was understanding how are we going to delineate the responsibilities, who's going to really handle what, and just being able to build and play off our strengths. And I think so far we've done a great job at that. You know, one of the things we get a lot of compliments on is just that family feel of the business. And that just kind of comes with it when you're dealing with a mother-son combo. And I'm also a twin, and I have an older brother as well, and they're both involved in the business. So
nice.
Yeah, it's been great.
Very cool. Well, we're going to transition to a part of the show where I ask, what kind of person are you? Yeah. And in order to ask you this, I want to ask about the meal that you could eat every day for the rest of your life.
So a meal that I could eat every day for the rest of my life is gumbo. Gumbo, my grandmother's gumbo in particular, but really any gumbo. My family is from New Orleans, and I spent my summers there growing up, and so some good gumbo for me will always hit the spot, and always got to have some Popeye's chicken with it as well. So,
Tell me what ingredients are core to making a good gumbo.
Ooh, so I mean, you have different kinds. You know, you can have a filet gumbo, or you can have your okra. I mean, your sausage, your shrimp. I mean, it's got to mix some chicken in there. So, yeah. I mean, I like a good seafood gumbo too. That's mostly got the shrimp in there. So
yeah. I like that you're open-minded about what can go into a gumbo.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Like my grandma, she could hook it up. She really could. So I'm kind of picky, you know, living up here in Virginia. You'll find places in DC or whatnot that say they're Cajun, but it's just not the same. And anybody from New Orleans will tell you it's just not the same.
I grew up in Memphis, and so grew up kind of as a barbecue snob. And the worst, I'll have anybody prove me otherwise, the worst barbecue town is Nashville, Tennessee. There's a lot of good stuff Nashville has. Terrible for
Wow.
barbecue. There's one good barbecue joint. It's called the Peg Leg Porker. Every other barbecue place is either some big commercial chain or it's garbage. I could be wrong.
I was just in Nashville for our conference, and I had the best ribs I ever had in my life. I tell you what, the best ribs I've ever had in my life.
I've been immediately proved wrong. Where did you have those ribs?
I can't even recall the name of the place, but it was on that main strip down
Sure.
near their stadium and stuff. It was right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's some ribs somewhere on Broadway that you should have as well. So two good places. I maintain it's the worst barbecue town.
And I was actually born in Memphis as well. I haven't been back
nice.
since then, but yeah.
Nice. Very cool. Well, good. Well, I bring people on the show who've had a lot of success. You guys have been in the business for 5 years, have grown it a lot. But we don't bring people on because they're going to talk about their success stories. Instead, I want to hear about the big mistake that you made that changed the way that you think about your business. So, Zach, what's your big mistake?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we kind of kicked off, we were able to hit the ground running, and on paper things looked really pretty. But when you got behind the scenes, you kind of could see where things weren't as great on the forefront. Our biggest mistake was initially optimizing for a large influx of clients instead of really focusing on the quality of those leads. And what I mean by that is when we kicked off initially, our first client was a Medicaid client.
Yep.
And while it did start by getting wrong rates from a case manager and whatnot, once we found out what those rates were, we decided to continue doing it just because the Medicaid market was really there. And, coming from a background of not having ran a business before, you learn very quickly that your margins matter. And when we started this business, looking into things, we knew we weren't going to be able to jump straight out with benefits and all kinds of other things, but we did know we could come out and pay people well. And
Sure.
it's been one of our most competitive aspects when it comes to hiring is that we simply pay more than the competition around us. And so doing that and taking Medicaid, it just doesn't match up. And so unfortunately we did have to make that transition. And we keep our credentialing, and in the future as we grow, we would like to be able to still, potentially help that population through waivers or other forms. But, like I said, going for Medicaid out of the gate was probably the biggest mistake that we made.
Yeah. I hear a lot of people talk about how important a diverse payer source is, having a blend of private pay and VA and Medicaid and long-term care. And maybe there's some other payers here and there, like you can find some work comp cases on occasion. And it sounds like when you guys started out, it was kind of, almost entirely Medicaid payer mix. Is that about right?
Yeah, definitely from an hours perspective, those Medicaid ones just came with large hourly requirements. So initially, like I said, we were kind of able to hit the ground running and keep people working, right? Like I said, as we grow, I definitely can see an avenue for Medicaid, just more or less to kind of keep people working. But you need to be able to afford to do that, right? So
yeah. And I think, one of the things that you've said well here is that like a built-in retention bump for your agency is to pay better than your market. But often, the margins that exist with Medicaid don't really set you up to pay maybe even above what people expect. What's the minimum that you'll go to work for an hour? There are markets where a lot of times the Medicaid reimbursement rate, you've got to get real scrappy or be at pretty significant scale to be able to make that work. So, I think one of the challenges that I typically hear when I'm talking to a new agency owner is they're in the private pay mode and they've got 1, 2, 3 clients, and that kind of instability around you get a client and you lose a client, and you get a client and you lose a client. And it's interesting that your story is kind of the opposite of that. Tell me what that process was like in terms of making that transition from being a Medicaid heavy agency to making a strategic decision to go, all in on private pay.
Yeah.
And, how did you prevent like starting all the way back over?
Right. Great question. So, while we were all in on Medicaid, we continuously focused our marketing efforts on the private pay market, right? Making sure our SEO was strong. And like I said, just getting out there and doing our networking and building our private pay referral sources first and foremost. Like I said, Medicaid, it didn't take a whole lot of work to get those clients. You get in with a case manager and you got that influx. So while we were able to optimize for it, it didn't take a lot of footwork. So in the meantime, we were still getting private pay clients and optimizing for private pay clients. And that's kind of what made it all the more obvious that, look, this Medicaid side just is not cutting it. And so, once we made that realization, we just allowed for kind of the natural matriculation of clients, whether that be passing away, whether that be needing to go into a facility. And then when we were down to about one or two, I personally facilitated the transition to another agency because, it's sad to say, but when you're dealing with those low reimbursement rates, you have to be careful with the Medicaid agencies you go with.
Sure.
And so, it was a beautiful thing for that period of time to kind of be a superstar agency in that Medicaid world. And so either way, it was hard transitioning those clients to other agencies, but I did my due diligence meeting with those agencies first. And like I said, helping train some of their caregivers as well. So it ended up being smooth, but I mean, it's hard,
Totally. And something I hear a lot about in home care is the different ways that agencies think about the competitive landscape and how they interact with other home care agencies. And I think that idea of like you're vetting people that could be a place that you refer to, could be a potential referral source to yourself. So talk a little bit about the kinds of relationships that you've developed with other home care agencies in your area and how you kind of view the purpose or the utility of those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Home Helpers is a franchise, so we are relegated to our specific, territory. And for us being in Northern Virginia, which is such a densely populated area, other agencies that aren't relegated to that territory, we ended up bumping into them a lot. And so a lot of the times just territories in and of itself opens up an opportunity for referral sources. Right. And then really when we made that Medicaid transition, that was a really obvious opportunity for referral sources. And like I said, I was able to really pinpoint a good agency that's been doing it for over 30 years. They only take Medicaid. And so, I was able to pinpoint them, and they have a much broader reach than us. And so, I mean, if I get a Medicaid call, I refer it to them. And if they get a private pay call, they refer them to me. And I mean, that one was it took a little bit of work to really build that relationship. But once we actually made that transition from Medicaid, I was able to give them referrals first. And once they saw that I was serious about, referring them clients, and especially after making that direct transition, they were able to see that I was serious and committed first and foremost to my clients, right? I'm giving you a referral, but I'm referring my client to you because I believe you're what's best for the client. And people appreciate that.
This is probably still fresh enough that, as people are thinking through, I want to grow my private pay footprint. I want to, I've already been all in on private pay, but, just not seeing enough client acquisition come in the door. What are some of the keys that led to success as it relates to client acquisition in the private pay world?
Mm-hmm. So building those referral sources, right? The other home care agencies are great, but they are still competition at the end of the day. So you need to build referral sources in other places. My number one referral source is a home health agency. They're coming in to do PT and OT a couple times a week for an hour or so. Typically, people who need that level of care also need some additional resources, and that's where home care can come in. And so, that's my number one referral source. Hospice agencies are huge as well. Same thing, right? Their hospice nurses aren't in there all throughout the week. But there's so many home care agencies, so you have to find some kind of way to differentiate yourself, especially when you're at these networking meetings and whatnot. And I think it's important to know your why, know your story. Why are you doing this, And for me, it's pretty easy. Like I said, having a family member who I had to fly to St. Thomas to rescue and bring home with my mom and try to get care for, and just see how horrible it was. Seeing a neighbor who was dear to my heart get horrible care. And like I said, just seeing that if you care, you can do a better job at this. And so, absolutely.
Yeah. When you talk about differentiating yourself in the eyes of referral sources, what's that process like for you?
Hitting the ground, going to as many networking events as you can, identifying a referral source, identifying a person, and then while you're at those networking events, asking them, is there another event you're going to be at, without, being pushy. And then, like I said, making sure they get to hear your why. If you have any special stories, any special client interactions you can share with them. I think back to when I first met my referral source with the home health. It was at a Mardi Gras party that go figure, I didn't want to attend, even though being from New Orleans. But I ended up going and ended up sharing with her a story of my older brother, Victor. He has autism, and he plays 11 different instruments at the mastery level. And oftentimes for my clients' birthdays, we'll bring him over and he'll play a saxophone or clarinet, whatever instrument he decides he feels like playing or they want to hear, and he'll play happy birthday for him. And I think I just shared that story with her, and it touched her heart. And we just, she could tell that, we're in this with our hearts, and because we love people, and we really, one thing that really shocked us that we did not expect to see was how many people just do not have anybody. Like, my goodness, my mom right now is helping out a lady with, mid-stage dementia who's trying to put together her own care. And it's like, that's the piece of this that I truly did not expect to be so prevalent. And so just what a gift it is to be able to take my family that I was so blessed to have and, really incorporate it into other people's lives.
Yeah. I think that's really well said. There's just, such an epidemic of loneliness in so many of the clients that home care agencies serve. And, I think it's easy to feel insulated when we've got good relationships and support structure and all that kind of stuff. Of a lot of folks don't end up having that as they get older. And sometimes it's geography, right? Kids are a long way away and can't be involved in mom's day-to-day care. But then, like in this case, it sounds like there's also just can be a vacuum of those relationships, and the folks that they've been close to have passed away or in care themselves, and they're all on their own. And so great that you guys are able to be such a valuable like resource and kind of source of stability in what's obviously a really difficult time.
And that's been the number one response I've gotten from referral sources, is that they can tell that we're genuine. Anytime, if you ever get the opportunity to host something, do it, even if it's a door prize, at an event, or lunch and learns have been huge for us. And, I was steered initially not to overdo it with those. You don't want to get it. You don't want a facility to start taking advantage of you or whatnot. But it's like, if you get the opportunity to share your why and your story in front of other referral sources, that can be just as good as, a facility giving you a client or giving you someone on their waiting list. So absolutely.
It's great. Okay, I want to transition to a part of the show where I ask you about something that is underrated in this industry. You think it's great. The rest of the industry can overlook it at times.
So one thing I think that's underrated is just how we could utilize our caregivers. A lot of our caregivers are coming to us from past professions. They have specialties that can be utilized, whether it's knitting or cooking or, anything like that. And so, it's twofold. You can empower your employees and really give them some agency so that they, feel in control of their work and, they're more excited for work. And then also it's enriching the clients' lives, right? Yeah. So I think people really, they kind of get that warm body sense of people. I just need to get someone. I need to hire someone. Right. Just get me somebody who's got that CNA or that PCA, and I'm good. But no, really get to know these folks. When we hire people, with our initial hiring docs is a list of favorites. Your favorite restaurant, favorite color, things like that, just so we can kind of get to know you. And come around birthday time, and we can put together a special basket for you, and just really getting to know people. And then also, like I said, it helps us customize while we pair them with clients.
Yeah, that sounds great. Is there a particular story that comes to mind of like this caregiver ended up being a perfect match for this client, and here's why?
Oh my gosh. Oh, all of the time. I have a client who, sadly, she recently passed away, and the caregiver we ended up pairing her with, she had a really strong faith, and this woman she had not had any faith throughout her life, and her daughters and her son had been trying to really bring her to Jesus. And towards the end, this caregiver, who had actually been a pastor in some of her past careers and whatnot, was able to help bring her to Jesus. And at the end, the client's daughter told me, my mom told me that she's walking with Jesus, and that's never a terminology they had used as a family. And so, that's just a really recent example. But a lot of times we find that we're able to make those pairings. If a client really needs meal preparation, they're like, I don't cook for myself, all I do is order out. We make sure to get that client who might be a grandma like my grandma, right? And knows how to really cook and throw down for him. So absolutely. Or a lot of times clients are like, I need a young, strong man. I've gotten that one a lot. A lot of companies don't have that. And so that's been a huge one for us, is being able to bring them what they need in that sense. So absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, I want to ask you about a little mistake that you see other home care owners make all the time. And if they quit, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
Not building that referral base, not building a community resource list. All of my clients get a community resource list with hospice agencies, home health agencies, plumbers, and whatnot. And, that's a huge thing you can tell a referral source when you're trying to get them to refer someone to you. Hey, is it okay if I add you to my newsletter or to my company resource list? So like I said, I see a lot of agencies just not optimizing for that. Even if they're showing up to these events, they're just kind of showing up, trying to talk to the few people they know, and they're not really trying to break the ground with these companies and showing them that, I can be a resource for you as well. It's important to try to give before you get, or at least showing that you're making that effort. Because I've had agencies do that to me. Like I've had a hospice agency he's always calling me, and he sent me a gift card, and it's just like, that's cool. But, it's not all about the gifts and whatnot, but just showing that you're putting in that effort and not just waiting to get something.
I'm curious, to build a successful agency and referral pipeline and all that kind of stuff, what's your perspective on the number of referral sources you need?
Ooh, the exact number, that's kind of hard to nail down, but I think it's about having, a variation of resources, right? Like other home care agency, home health, hospice, and if you can get a hospital itself, that's awesome as well. So I'd say you need at least 4 or 5.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, let's transition to a part of the show where we talked about a lot of mistakes and stuff that went wrong, but I like to end every episode on a high note. So what's something that's happened lately in your business that you're really proud of?
Yeah, so I was sitting in our office the other day, and I get a call from one of my clients. And I answer the phone. I'm like, hi, we'll just call her Mrs. Robinson. That's not her name. I don't have a Mrs. Robinson. I'm like, hi, Mrs. Robinson. How are you doing today? She's like, hi, Zach. I have a nurse from the hospital on the other line. I'm going to connect you. And that's all she says. And I'm just like,
okay.
Hey, yeah, absolutely. And she answers the phone. She's like, hello. And she's like, yes, I have the owner of Home Helpers on the other line. She's like, hi, I just, and she's in tears. She's like, just needed to call and let you know that one of your employees is so amazing. I would have thought he was this gentleman's grandson, the way he was just so patient and so connected. And at first my heart was beating. I'm like, what is going on?
Right. I must be in trouble, right?
Right. And then it ends up being a nurse crying because my employee was so kind with the client and so gentle, because this gentleman was in there for a UTI, and he was really, really aggravated. And I guess my caregiver, who was actually one of those young men I was telling you about, and he's like, I thought it was his grandson. And when I found out that was a caregiver, I just knew I needed to connect with his boss, because I was brought to tears. And proud is an understatement. I was thrilled. So.
That's awesome. Well, before we get out of here, what do you want to plug?
So I would love to plug a nonprofit organization called the House Student Leadership Center. Before even starting this company, and even now, I still work with them, and they push into schools in DC and have an after-school program, and they're a leadership center. So really taking at-risk youth and not trying to turn them into anything, but just really helping them become the best versions of themselves. So it's called the House Student Leadership Center, and it was an integral part of my life growing up, and proud to say I'm still a part of that organization today.
Very cool. Well, Zach, this has been a ton of fun. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Of course. Thank you, David. I really appreciate it.
On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode, so be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.